start. To be honest. My name is Lee. Um, I'm an ex-producer for Hotbox Entertainment. In terms of like getting into music, I first got into it when I was about 13. I was just starting to learn guitar. I was really inspired by Mumford and Sons. I was like, they're great. I'll learn how to do that. So that's kind of where I got my start. And then I think around 17, 18-ish, I got more into R&B, hip hop, rap, the likes of Kendrick, The Weeknd, blah blah blah. That's sort of how I got more into the genre that Hotbox sort of deals with. I think it was around 23, 24 ish, and I'd seen an ad for the Hotbox had posted an ad asking for producers. At that time, I was sort of making my own music, like on my laptop, with Logic Pro, and I was like, well, I could do that, and that's sort of where I wanted to go anyway. So I applied, alongside, and then got accepted. Sorry, for an interview. It wasn't really an interview. It was more just a sort of just casual sort of discussion about, what skills I had that were relevant and all that stuff. And then I got accepted alongside another 3 people to sort of work as a producer part-time, doing like a couple days a week. I liked working there to start because, like I say, it was something that I wanted to do. Like, I really wanted to get into the music industry, and at the time I didn't really know how, and that was sort of like my in. And plus I just got to work with a load of really great artists, which was always fun. A lot of great personalities as well, and I just sort of felt like I was part of something that was helping the community. So that aspect of it was nice at the time. The workplace culture was pretty casual, I would say. I wouldn't say unprofessional, but it was sort of borderline. It was very loose, not very well organized a lot of the time. There would be customers coming in and I didn't even know they were meant to be there, things like that. So that was sort of an initial red flag. OJ's management style was interesting, to say the least, in that it was, like I said, it was very casual, not super professional. Any problems were just sort of either brushed aside or just like, it's fine, it'll be gone. And my sort of concerns weren't really taken into account when making certain decisions. So when it came to certain decisions and things, it was more that me as a person, I've sort of suffered from like depression, anxiety for most of my life. Especially when it comes to anxiety, there were certain situations in the studio that would sort of trigger that, and I would get very stressed, and sort of overwhelmed, and I would sort of bring this up to OJ in an attempt to be like, can we sort of manage this in a way that that situation doesn't occur? And he was very much just like, that's just how it is. There's nothing. Well, he wouldn't expressly say there's nothing I can do about it, but that's essentially what I was getting from it. And he would basically just tell me to relax, just calm down, like, don't stress. And for someone who has anxiety, having someone tell you to just not stress, it's like, it's pointless. It's like asking a bird not to fly. Yeah, it definitely did cause, it just sort of doubled down on it. more than anything, double down on the stress. I was like, well, that support's not there, so I can't do anything about this. I'm just gonna have to suck it up. And for me, it wasn't easy to do that, especially because certain situations would just sort of exceed my capacity to deal with it. First time I brought those sort of things up to him, he was very apathetic. I was sort of getting the impression that he didn't really understand mental illness or mental health. He almost seemed to be of the mind that I was making it up. So, for obvious reasons, that didn't really help. Just by his attitude, it would almost feel like I'd told a joke without realizing. Like, he would either just sort of let off a little laugh, like, mate, but don't worry about it, don't stress, or just say, look, that's just how it is. And I understand that a lot of workplaces, it is a part of the job where you're just like, right, I have to stick through this. But when it gets to the point where you feel the need to bring it up to the person who's meant to be, managing you and helping you do your job, and they just say, suck it up, too bad. Like that's, like I said before, it just sort of compounds it, makes it worse. The pay issue sort of started in about February of 2023. I had started working there in November previous year, so it was pretty early on, only 3-4 months in. There was delay to payment, and there was always some kind of reason for it. Either funding wasn't coming in, or you just didn't have it, which is obviously concerning. You don't want your employer basically turning around and saying, yeah, don't have money to pay when you've been doing all this work. So yeah, that was another red flag for obvious reasons. It would be the end of the month would come and he would have some reason for not having the money. So like I say, it would either be these elusive grants that he'd always talk about wasn't coming in yet, or I'm pretty sure he said that he was at one point he was having to sell his car in order to pay me. That was quite early on. I think at one point he was moving into a different apartment so that he could afford to pay me. But my initial thinking at the time was, well, if you are having to do these things to pay staff, why do you have staff? Why do you have a business? Because I feel like maybe in some optimistic way he was hoping it was just gonna work itself out, and it's never did. So I think the biggest moment that stuck out to me was when we were doing the 2-day event for the NI's Finest mixtape, and he was getting these billboards set up, which at the time I thought that's very cool. Having not to sound selfish or anything, but having my face on a billboard for something that I love doing was kind of a big deal for me. So I was very excited for that. And around the sort of same time, there was more payment issues, and I sort of called him on it one day in the studio while he was there, and they essentially said that he couldn't pay me because he had to pay for the billboards. So I think at the time, this was around, when was that 2-day event?
November.
It was November. So in around November time, I was owed, £1,431. and he basically said, yeah, I can't give you that because I have to pay for these billboards, it's for the business. And at this time, I had become the sole producer because the other three had left. So I was essentially running the business in terms of the day to day, taking customers and mixing and mastering everything. And to have him sort of turn around and say, yeah, for the business, I have to do this. I don't know. It just hurt a lot. During my time working there, when it was just me as the only producer sort of left, there was not a lot, but the odd complaint in terms of like the quality of the work, which I was totally fine with because as long as I know what's wrong and how I can work on it, that's fine. If you're gonna just say this is crap and then not elaborate, like that's no use to anyone, in my opinion. So that was my stance on it. So when he would say, yeah, people have not been happy about like the mixes and masters and stuff, I would ask like, oh, what was wrong with them, and he just wouldn't tell me. He would sort of just say that's for you to figure out or something along those lines. So I was being told that I was doing a bad job and then not being told how to improve, which I found a bit confusing for obvious reasons. It's kind of hard to improve something when you're just left in the dark to guess what it is you need to improve. So I think it was either him or me that initially suggested, actually I think it was him, that initially suggested that I work or train under, I should say, Eulogy. He's a producer here in Belfast. Everyone knows him. He's fantastic. Does incredible work. So obviously I was very keen for that because I love him. And I was aware of him and I had talked to him before. We were sort of friendly-ish. So I was very keen for that, but it never happened. And I brought it up to him multiple times and he'd say, yeah, we'll get there, we'll do that. And he would make all these promises and then it just didn't happen. So like him sort of sitting me down and saying, look, people aren't happy with the quality of the mix and masters, and then me say, right, well, how can I improve? Like, what exactly are they saying? And then he would just say, I think it was some strange idea of like, oh, it was like confidentiality, like I can't say who. And if anyone knows me, I'm not exactly about to go and shut your head off because you said I did something wrong. Like I will just say like, let's talk about it. Like how can we improve? Like what can I do to help you get what you want here? And everyone who went to the studio would probably say something similar. I'd like to think so anyway. So him having this idea of, oh well, I can't tell him because then blah blah blah, it was very confusing because it's like, well, I'm trying to improve my work. The improved work's going to make the business better because people will say, oh, the quality here is improved, the quality's good, blah blah blah. But that, I don't think that ever occurred to him that would be the case. It was just very confusing. It's hard to improve on a job if you're not told how to. How the situation made me feel. Where do I even start? I guess coming out of it, I was just very disillusioned with music. And just the music industry in general, at least here in Northern Ireland, because my thinking was if at this low level in terms of like, popularity, like we're not Drake level stuff or Kendrick or whoever you want to compare it to. So someone at that lower level is willing to sort of manipulate and use people, then how could I possibly hope to survive any any higher, because like I'm a very non-confrontational person. I don't like arguments. I would much rather just discuss and work something out. But when it's someone like this, it's not feasible. So I was just sort of thinking, right, well, so if someone at this lower level is willing to do this, then I have no chance, because I don't want to operate like that. I don't want to feel like I would get to a point where if I had to, felt like I had to, because that's just not who I am. So that's definitely one effect it had, for sure. I remember messaging him. I think I sent him like an email in terms of like, here's my notice, I'm leaving. And I got the impression that he wasn't all that bothered. He was just sort of like, okay, cool, off you go then. Best of luck. There wasn't like, if there ever was apology made, it wasn't, I'm sorry I did that. It was, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry that's how you saw it. It was always still your fault somehow, which made me kind of feel sick, because that's not how a sincere apology goes. I found it, I always found it sort of ironic that he was willing to set up these sort of mental health initiatives and initiatives for disabled people and things like that, when I would sort of bring up those concerns myself and he would sort of brush them aside. I always found it very ironic, because on one hand he's championing helping these kind of people, but then behind closed doors the people that are helping him try to do that, they don't matter in that regard. Their mental health doesn't matter. Just do the work. Yeah. Well, the darkest times at Hotbox were after I left, really. Like, this sort of dream job that I'd sort of coveted since I was like 13, like a child basically, was gone. And with no, it wasn't even like I have to leave this because external reason. It was coming from within the job, and I suppose that just sort of crushed me a wee bit. I remember my mental health not being very good. I obviously had to pay rent, so I had to get a new job. It was just like a retail job, something I'd done beforehand. For a while, it was okay. I just was sort of like, I think the anger of the whole situation was just sort of kept me going. There was one specific instance where, like, I just was supposed to be getting ready for work, but I was lying on the floor in my living room just crying. And I don't even really know why. It just sort of all just sort of came down on me at once, I think. I was just sort of trying to push through, and it just wasn't working anymore. And so I called in sick to work and got put on a sick line by my doctor. But obviously at this point now I'm not working either, so I have nothing to do. So I'm sitting in the house by myself, because my partner was working at the time, so they would be out of the house. Sort of sitting in the house by myself, just with all this stuff. And at one point I thought, you know what, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, I tried so hard my whole life to try and get a job like that, and then well, that happened. So I went for a walk, and I went to Albert Bridge. Just kind of stood there, hoping that something would just propel me to jump, because I couldn't really bring myself to do it for whatever reason.
You're doing so well, you can take a minute if you need a minute, no problem.
Yeah, I think I will. After the first time, I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure I went home. Like, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So I walked home again, and I think I rang my mum and just said I need to go to the hospital. I think I can't remember if that's what happened. It's all kind of a blur. So I ended up at the Mater Hospital as a sort of emergency, whatever you want to call it, with like a mental health assessment and all that, and they sent me home again. And then I think about 2 weeks later, I went to the bridge again. And I think what happened that time is that a sort of an older woman sort of walked past and sort of said, like, "Are you alright, son?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm alright," because I'm not going to be like, "No, I'm actually about to try and kill myself." So I'm not doing great. You're not going to say that to a stranger. So I think that's what sort of talked me out of that, and I contacted Paige, who I was still friendly with, because she lived nearby. And I went to her house and we just sort of talked for a while. And then I went home again. It took a lot for me to realise, like, I'm not processing this. Like, it's not going well. I'm not over this yet. So I tried to go to a private therapist, which worked for a little bit, and then I sort of had a suspicion that I was autistic. I brought this up to my therapist, and they were like, "That makes no difference." And to have someone who's paid to talk to people like that, and just say, "Yeah, no, that's not what it is," and just not even attempt to take it into account, just really did not help either. So I stopped going to that therapist, and then I went to my doctor, wanted to get a diagnosis, which turns out is hard, but the only thing that we changed was my medication, and that helped. That sort of brought me out of it. And the only reason I'm still here is because of that. Like, if I hadn't changed my medication, I definitely would have killed myself by now. So, yeah. So now, like a year later or so, I've done my level 2 in creative media with Belfast Met, and I'm going on to do level 3 game development with Belfast Met as well.
And you're in Dead Old Digital having a boys' night.
Something like that, yeah. So I'm a lot better now, but it doesn't really change what happened. It still happened, and I just don't want anyone else to go through that. And I've kind of just had that in the back of my mind ever since, and I'm just sort of glad I can talk about it now, without feeling like, I don't know, like it's wrong. If I had to give a piece of advice to people who are sort of going through stuff like that is you're still you. At any given moment, you're allowed to make your own decisions. You're your own person. And if someone is sort of controlling you or manipulating you or making you feel like your feelings aren't real or correct, it's not true. Your feelings are justified. Your feelings are real. And if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.